In this video, we're going to look at some of the common mistakes that you can make during bead crochet and how to recognize them and fix them. And the first one that I want to show you is one that I was alluding to when I showed you the bead crochet slip stitch. So I'm just setting up to make the stitch here. I will bring some beads down so that we're ready to go. And we're stitching into a purple bead and bringing down a purple bead. And now you'll remember my commenting that the working yarn should be between the two loops on the crochet hook. That's to make sure that it doesn't get caught around anything else, especially the bead that you're crocheting into, which is an easy mistake to make when you're starting out. So if you do get the yarn lodged around there, then your stitch is going to come out wrong, but you probably won't notice it right away. So what will almost undoubtedly happen is you'll just keep on going, not realizing that there's anything wrong right off the bat. So you go ahead and you stitch blue into blue and yellow into yellow and orange into orange, and the tube is rotating back around, and all of a sudden you go, oh, whoops, that doesn't look right at all, does it? Right, you can see the two purple beads, they're sort of where they should be, but the new one is hanging out loose in this very strange position. So the good news, very, very easy to fix. Pull out the crochet hook, and then you just tug on the yarn to undo the stitches back to where you made the mistake. In fact, if you want to be safe, you can even pull back a little bit further. Right? And now you need to find the loop that the crochet hook was in. It will often be retracted a bit, so it's in there, but it's a little small to put the crochet hook in, so I'll just reach for something sharp like the tapestry needle, works very well for yarn, and pull that loop back out. And then I can put the crochet hook back in and tighten the loop, and I'm ready to go again. So now I can just redo those stitches that I did before, including the one that was messed up into the purple bead. As long as I don't make any other mistakes, you won't even know that anything ever went wrong. Any of you who crochet or knit will know this is one of the best things about these types of fiber arts, is that you can always pull out your stitches and start again. And in almost every case, you just simply won't know that anything happened that wasn't supposed to. And now I'm stitching into that stitch that was formerly messed up. And we're well past that point, and everything looks fine, maybe a little bit displaced. But yeah, there we are. Can't even tell that there was a mistake. Now, that particular error was easier to pick out in this tube because we had a well-established tube with good stitches. But it is fairly common when you're first doing bead crochet and don't know what you're doing to make that mistake in succession and not really know what's going on. So here is a beginning of a bead crochet tube where I deliberately made that mistake as often as I could. This is a fairly common thing to happen when you're first learning and you don't really know what you're doing and you're trying to follow the instructions, but it's sort of coming out like this. It doesn't quite look right. And you might not be sure exactly why. And the telltale sign, if you see these kind of bits of yarn that are hanging out kind of loosely around the tube, that's a pretty good indication that you're making errors like this. But once again, you can totally pull this out and start over. Even from back to the beginning of the bracelet, you just pull the very whole thing out, everything, and then redo your slip knot and start over again. Just like mistakes in the middle of the tube, these are completely fixable. Now, when you're doing the simple 5-spiral pattern, those are the types of mistakes that you're likely to make. The stringing is so simple that you're not likely to mess that up. And the arrangement of colors on the bracelet is straightforward. So even when you're doing this in small seed beads, you're only likely to have problems with malformed stitches. But when you do something more complicated, such as bonbon checkerboard, this design that I showed you in the first video, there are other mistakes that can come up. So this is a 6-around bracelet with a more complicated stringing arrangement. So as you're crocheting, you will not always be crocheting red into red and white into white and black into black. By the way, interest of full disclosure, I didn't actually string enough for a whole bracelet. So if you were doing a bracelet, you'd have more beads left over. But if you look closely at this tube so far, the bottom looks fine, but near the top, the colors are messed up, right? That top white diamond isn't coming out the way that it should. Now, in some cases, an error like this will come down to the beads being strung in the wrong order, but that's not what's happening here. So let's take a closer look. So here is that tube with the error in it, and one of the clues as to what's going on is that if you look at the top of this, you'll find there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 beads, 3 white and 2 black. And as I mentioned, this is actually a 6-around bracelet, which you would know from the pattern, and because you would have started with 6 chain stitches. So that tells us that somewhere in this process we somehow lost a bead. And so that means we need to pull out the yarn again, in this case the thread, since this is a smaller bracelet, to get back to where we started. And just looking at the color pattern, you can see that the error is a little ways down. But as you're going along, too, at various points, you can check and see if you're there yet. So for example, here, once again, there are still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 beads, 3 red, a white, and a black. Right? So we're still not there yet, and we keep going. We have 5 beads, and now right here I am right up to the error. You probably can't quite see it yet, but you'll see it in a moment. When I pull that out, there, that's that 6th bead that was missing. So the way that I actually concocted this error was that when I made that stitch, I kind of sort of intentionally forgot to pull a bead down, and so that stitch just kind of disappeared, and suddenly this was as though it were a 5-around bracelet, right? So just like before, we can use something sharp. In this case, I'm taking a big eye needle to pull out the loop that the crochet hook goes into, and then we stick the crochet hook back in, and we are all ready to go to fix this mistake. So now I can just go into that black bead and press it back behind the crochet hook. And what I did before was I just made the stitch without pulling this black bead down. But now I will pull the black bead down and I will make the stitch, and now this is completely fixed. Another way that you can effectively lose a bead is if you accidentally just skip a bead. So if I were to put my crochet hook into the next bead along the second black bead instead of the first, that could produce a similar error. So let me show you a different kind of error that goes in the other direction. So I'm feeding my beads down, and let's say I kind of lose focus and I accidentally feed down 2 beads instead of 1. So in this stitch I'm supposed to be making a stitch with 1 red bead. I've just slid 2 of them down, and so now I make that stitch, and again this is one where you might not notice this right away. So you will probably keep crocheting, and I'll go ahead and do that so that you can kind of see what would happen if you didn't notice this. This particular mistake where you bring down 2 beads at once, you will catch it as soon as you get back to it on the other side. And these may all seem like implausible mistakes, but you know, when you're sort of in the flow of doing bead crochet, they're easier to make than you might think. And they're also particularly easy if you're making a bracelet where you're using 2 different sizes of beads. You sometimes do that to get interesting textural effects. And then, for example, you might accidentally skip a small bead next to a large bead. Much easier than you'd think. Okay, so now we're right before the stitch with the mistake, and so I'm stitching the black bead in, and now once I get that through, when I go into this stitch, suddenly that's really looking wrong. You'll see there are 2 beads on top of my hook. There should only be 1. So like pushing them back is really not going to work. Now even if you don't get all the way around to there, you can also catch this by a bead count, because this time there will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 beads because of the extra bead. So you might also catch it that way. Either way, you just pull back and start over again. So just as with all the other errors, you can always just pull out your crochet hook. Start again. No one will ever know. Now, we concluded that the errors that we saw in the previous segment were not stringing errors, but if you do have a stringing error, then that's going to also mess up your pattern, because your pattern entirely comes from the color order of the beads, and that will be a mistake that needs to be fixed. Unlike these other mistakes, stringing errors are a real pain to fix, so as much as possible you want to avoid making them in the first place. And here is one nice way to double check your stringing you'll generally be stringing a short sequence over and over again. And so you can actually arrange the beads on the yard so you can hold different sections up next to each other and just compare them directly visually, see that they're the same number of each color of beads. Now, in practice, the bead sizes aren't super precise, so you may need to have to slide one strand back and forth a little bit to make the comparison. But that's a really good way to proofread your patterns. That being said, mistakes will still slip through. So what do you do if you do end up with a stringing error and you've already started to crochet? Well, if it's a simple error that just involves a few extra beads, like let's say these 2 black beads weren't supposed to be there, if they're small and they're breakable, so basically not metal, if they're glass or stone, you can take a set of jewelry pliers like this. And what's nice about the jewelry pliers is they have a smooth surface, right, because they're designed to hold beads without damaging them. The particular shape of the jewelry pliers doesn't matter much. You could also use a set like this. The important thing is just that smooth surface, right? And so what you can do is you can take each of the extra beads and stick it right in the middle of the pliers. And I'm not going to do this because that black bead is actually supposed to be there, but you squeeze the pliers until the bead shatters and you remove it from the thread. The one thing you have to be a little bit careful about is the sharp edges can cut the thread. Putting some cloth around the bead can help, but if you're really concerned, you might just slide everything all the way down the spool far enough that even if the thread does break, it's not going to matter. Now, if you have a more complicated stringing error or you don't have jewelry pliers, there's another thing you can do. It's a little bit more jarring, but you can cut the thread where the error is, which again, I'm not going to do because this is just fine. But there is actually a method that allows you to join a new bit of thread to a tube in progress. We're going to show that in the next video. So you can just cut the thread and now fix the stringing error on the far side of the thread and then join it into your tube, and that will solve any error.